Welcome to the Dirty Air Debrief, a Formula One podcast. My name is Deviani, and this is a show for shits and gigs by me, a Formula One fangirl, for all, as we follow our favorite rich, privileged men as they trot the globe and drive around in really fast circles. Welcome back to the Dirty Air Debrief. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Now this week, Formula One spring break is officially over, so we are back, ready to go to Azerbaijan. But if you haven't listened to it before, how this works is I'll talk about whatever topic is taking my fancy currently, and I'll give myself a random amount of minutes to speak about said topic, because otherwise I will ramble on forever. And at the end, I'll have a little timer ring, and it should sound something like this. Okay. And and then we'll go from there. Okay, spring break is over, and I feel like I've lived about 10 lives and aged 80,000 years. Now, spring break was bookended by one Charles Leclerc chasing down his thieves who stole his watch in a very recognizable Ferrari. Very Batman of him. I love the vigilante thing. And on the other side of spring break, we have Charles Leclerc releasing his music. Now, this was teased in a Formula One Never Have I Ever, which was probably filmed months ago, I'm assuming. And then suddenly everyone is calling for him to release the music. And what does he do? He gives the people what they want. And, well, granted, right now it's not available where I am, but I did listen to a part of it. And it is probably the most gut-wrenching thing I've ever heard. That's not true. But it's just a piano piece, and it is very emotional. And I do feel special that he shared this piece of himself with all, 10 million of his followers, and probably more, I'm assuming, have listened to it. It is aptly named OS23, which, if you know, you know. And you all definitely know, so... That's the bookends of spring break, but in the middle has been the buildup of the most bizarre thing ever, which is Fernando Alonso and Taylor Swift. And I do think we've talked about this a bit much, or at least I have. And the only thing that I have to take away from this is that Tumblr is at the forefront of the internet discourse always, whether that's gossip, lore. I mean, it's always the genesis of the most hilarious information that usually begins with someone shitposting on their main account, which is a beautiful thing, honestly. It's internet in the modern age. It's perfect. The other thing that happens a lot when there's nothing going on in Formula One is Stefano Domenicali speaks a lot, which I'm not opposed to. It's just sometimes I feel like he says stuff in order to get roasted. Like, he knows what's going to happen, so why doesn't anyone be like, yo, maybe you shouldn't say this without thinking through this idea first? There's really no reason to put out articles about a half-fleshed idea. It's really unnecessary in this day and age. But basically, every time he opens his pie hole, something interesting comes out, and we have something else to talk about. So this time, his statement about historic tracks might lose their spot because just being historic isn't enough to keep their spot on the Formula One calendar, which, yeah, sure, I understand, they should be making updates, they should be getting with the times, but I guess I don't have an objective point of view because, who does, but everything's subjective. But heritage and history are really important to me. I am a history nerd, maybe that's why, who knows? And what engendered from Stefano Domenicali's comment is this thing about American versus European races. The idea that, there was a rumor that America, by America I mean the United States of America, not North America, would get a fourth race, which angered a lot of people, understandably so. What country needs 4 races? But this began a little bit of a, what should I call it, feud, trashing on Twitter, as it always is, where the American versus European battle was extremely entertaining. And my only real comment is, guys, the rest of the world exists. It's not the 1500s or the 1940s. You guys are not the only people who, have thoughts and stuff. Not that they did then, but, that's the colonial and capitalist way of thinking about it. Anyway, both Europeans and Americans, and my nationality is American and my ethnicity is Maharashtrian, aka India, and Europeans and Americans tend to consider themselves the center of the world, as they have been for quite a few centuries. But the idea that America should have more races because it's a bigger country is, in my head, just dumb. Like, it's just dumb because that's land mass, geographically big company, I can't speak, big country. And of course it's hard for people to get to Grand Prix because of that land mass, I understand. But that's not the amount of people. And yes, travel might be more inaccessible here because of the lack of an efficient rail system or just generally financially accessible travel as well as accommodation. But that doesn't mean that everyone in Europe can necessarily just like take a short train to a Grand Prix. There are other barriers involved. And generally, I think neither America nor Europe need more races. I don't know. But I do think that it is important to keep some of the historic tracks on the calendar, which is why I see the benefits of a rotational calendar where maybe there are some Grand Prix that are hosted every year, and then others who maybe can't afford to pay that Formula One fee every year, maybe they get a rotational spot and they share that fee with another track. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. A lot of the European argument was that, well, the origin of Formula One and motorsport is in Europe, aka Italy, France, the UK, other countries. But Formula One is a world championship. It's not a European championship. And in fact, in the first season of Formula One in 1950, Indianapolis was on there. So beat that with a stick. But anyway, I think the infighting has to stop. Why are we turning against each other? Formula One management and Liberty Media's goals are not exactly to make sure that everybody gets to go to a Grand Prix. I highly doubt they care about that. Their goal is to grow the sport, and to them that means make as much profit as humanly possible. Not to make it as accessible as possible, which is why regular fans, content creators, professional fans, whatever you want to call them, that's what they do. They make the sport more accessible, either by taking you behind the scenes or whatever. And I think that, of course, more fans should get to go to a Grand Prix. It's just the world we live in. But I don't know. It seems unlikely. And then again, I've never been to a Grand Prix. I will be going to one this year. So we'll see. Maybe it's not worth it because I really do like to have all the information. And at the track, there's no Wi-Fi. There's no, it's hard to keep up to date with everything that's going on track. Obviously, you get to see the cars in person and the environment is cool. And I'm sure there's a million other benefits that I just don't know. But there are trade-offs to going to see a race in person, but obviously it's more about the experience and the atmosphere and being around all these other people who love the same thing you do, which is hard when you're watching the race alone at home at 3:30 a.m. So, you know what? It's a give and take situation. Okay, the other piece of news that I saw that was intriguing to me was that the grid procedure time is being expanded from 40 to 50 minutes for the presentation of drivers to fans at certain events. Now, this I'm not really enraged about. I don't really, care one way or another. I did see a lot of people replying to this or quote tweeting it with this quote from Pierre Gasly that's like, we're not animals in a zoo for people to look at, which is very understandable. And, drivers have so many commitments during race weekend that have nothing to do with driving and more to do with sponsorships, fan engagement, etc., etc. But I will say it's said at certain races, and I'm just assuming that they're going to be American races like COTA, Las Vegas, maybe Miami, I don't know. But I do think that when Michael Buffer announced the drivers at COTA in 2017, it was very, very cool. It's still something I remember to this day about like uniqueness at a race and like having something culturally relevant to that country or to, that Grand Prix. And in an American context, it makes sense. It's meaningful. It's recognizable. Whether you're watching like wrestling or, you recognize him from Let's Get Ready to Rumble, you know his voice. Even if you don't know his name, you know his voice. And I think it's pretty cool. Also, it just sounds cool when he announces the drivers, although a lot of the drivers themselves did not bring any enthusiasm when they walked out into that like welcome thing, but that's okay. Daniel Ricciardo definitely did. Unfortunately, he won't be announced this time, but that's okay. Moving on. No time for sadness. Oh, of course, for me, as a Sebastian Vettel fan, the most important piece of news that came out over the winter break was that there was a Seb spotting, and those are rare nowadays, which is totally fine. But he was spotted at the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix in Stuttgart with a Porsche executive. And obviously, my mind immediately was like, well, who's he driving for? What is the connection here? Obviously, there's probably none, but one can hope, one can dream. He did say in this commercial for the plant-based energy drink that he sponsors that he's still very close to racing, and at some point he probably will jump into a car and compete somewhere. Whenever that day comes, if it does, I will be there. Seb agenda forever. Anyway, I'm glad it's race week, because when Formula One fans get bored for a little bit too long, they tend to fight. We tend to fight on Twitter about really inane things, and it happens to me too. I sometimes have to really silence the keyboard warrior within myself. I'm working really hard on not getting baited on Twitter because it's such instant gratification, but I'm very grateful for the draft function, because otherwise I would just be so annoying, even though I already am. Anyway, today's the main thing that I saw was, it was like a poll, and it was, would you prefer a driver with pure pace or pure adaptability? Or not pure, just adaptability. Which turned into a Charles Leclerc versus Lando Norris mini debate with quote retweets galore and no real conversation, which is fine. And I began furiously typing, and then I was like, why? Who cares? Let people be wrong. It's fine. We don't have to agree to disagree. They can just be wrong in peace. Oh, okay. So what's happening now? Let's talk Baku. So the Azerbaijan Grand Prix is this Sunday, and it's the first sprint race of this season. Now, sprint Saturdays are officially a thing, came out this morning, agreed between the Formula One Commission and the World Motorsport Council. I really want to reserve judgment and not say it's stupid before I actually see how it goes, and wait at least until we get through one. I want to give it a chance. I really do. I think it could be cool for strategy, for strategy's sake, but it's difficult. Baku's a really cool track. It's produced extremely entertaining and genuinely good racing in the past 6 Grand Prix it's been held. And yes, the first one was a European Grand Prix in 2016, but it still counts. It was in Baku. There's been no repeat winner. Charles Leclerc is the only repeat pole sitter in Baku. Incidents are really common there. And so my question is 8 points worth it in those 17 laps? What's really going to be accomplished? I do understand that making the sprint a completely separate entity is better for midfield and backmarker teams, because it means that they can take advantage of their qualifying spot and not have it completely erased during the sprint, which kept happening beforehand. So I guess we'll see what happens. I just think that having 2 qualifying sessions is a little bit overkill, in my opinion, but I mean, the sprint shootout is going to be shorter, and drivers won't get as many runs as they typically do in a regular qualifying session, because Q1 is 12 minutes, Q2 is 10 minutes, and Q3 is 8 minutes. So it's very much it's not really a shootout, but it's like an F2 qualifying basically, which again, I think it's good to have those formats be similar to one another, just in general. Other news for Baku, Ferrari will be bringing updates, at least in terms of a new diffuser being fitted, and then the rear suspension issues should be taken care of by Imola, and by Barcelona, the car should be looking pretty different. I still believe that if anyone can turn this around, it's Charles Leclerc, our Il Predestinato. Call me delusional, it's fine. I call myself that, so it can't be used as an insult, reclaiming terms and all that shit. But I think Baku is a great place for Charles Leclerc to start turning the needle a little bit, point by point, back in the direction towards the championship, towards race wins and podiums, etc. Baku is also fun because of the possibility for an unpredictable podium, hopefully we won't see a Verstappen, Perez, Alonso podium again. I don't want anything bad to happen to them or anything. I just think that there's more potential for mistakes in Baku, costly ones, in terms of finding the limit, especially in that really tight castle section, turns 8 through 12, because you can't really race there. You can't even have 2 cars side by side. I think it's 8 meters wide, or less than 8 meters wide. So it can be scary, I guess, if you're watching, if you don't like crashes, because who likes crashes? If you do, you're weird. There's also so many stories to follow this weekend. It's even likely that there's more potential for mistakes because there's only one practice session. So we'll see how that goes. I always love hearing what Max Verstappen has to say about new Formula One changes because he's very like, I don't like this. I want the race weekend to be as short as possible, and I want to get back to my life. And every time something changes, he's like, I'm gonna retire. I don't care. Which, respectable. You do you, bro. But it's hilarious. Every time he's like, I'm gonna retire. I don't care what the changes. Okay. So I've been into classic Formula One for a while. Well, a while being a couple of months. I think I got into it over winter break when I felt like I had rewatched all the races and I just needed something new to like sink my teeth into. And to my classic retro F1 fans, I have so much respect for you. Watching the grainy ass images of cars going around with very little, basically no graphics, and long durations of time without any commentary is so commendable. Like I said, I'm so used to having all this information at my fingertips, live timing data, like the graphics, lap times, deltas, tire compound, everything. But the stories around the driving are so cool, and I definitely think they're like the part of Formula One that first got me interested, like the narrative, the lore building, all of that is definitely more salient with classic F1 because a lot of those those driver stories are finished as Formula One drivers, so they already have a narrative. Like there's already lore. There's nothing new developing for the most part. So it's easy to contextualize and talk about like all the things that made them who they are. Many of them are no longer around anyway, so their stories are set. But learning about their rivalries and how they used to get along and how they banded together and the FISA FOCA war and everything, it's a joy. I'm definitely in my Gilles Villeneuve phase. Well, actually, I don't know how long a phase lasts. It's been a bit. I haven't really fallen in love with anyone new. I'm not saying I'm in love with Gilles Villeneuve, but I love him. All the dramatic and poetic things I love about racing and motorsport, Gilles Villeneuve really embodies that perfectly, even without having the raw statistics of like being a world champion or having the most X or having the most Y. I think Jody Scheckter, his teammate at one time, said it best when he said, for Gilles, racing is a romantic thing. He said, my preoccupation was keeping myself alive, but for him, the thing was to be fastest every race, every lap. And I believe he was the fastest racing driver the world has ever seen, which, I mean, to be said by your teammate, your rival, Jody Scheckter, who won the championship in 79, like, there's a lot to be said about what happens when a sportsman or any public figure, faces an early and tragic death and what happens to their reputation after that. A lot of it softens, and you never know what could have been. But Gilles Villeneuve is one of those people that a lot of the people, everything I've read so far, everyone's pretty unanimously agreeing that he's just raw pace, pure natural ability. He wasn't a dirty driver. He didn't use like tricks in the books. He was just fast, which is really cool. I don't know. I'm still in my Gilles Villeneuve phase. I hope I never like come out of it because I feel like it's easy to like a driver who's no longer competing. Like, there's nothing else they can do to make you not like them. Anyway, I think my all-time favorite drivers will never change. Like, I'll never not love Sebastian Vettel. But I do go through these phases where I'm, like, enamored with a certain driver. It could be because of their on-track performances. It could be because of their off-track antics. Like, personable people, I love them. Currently, it's definitely Yuki Tsunoda. My problem is that once the over-the-top admiration phase ends, I still want them to do well on track. So now I just want... Like, there's a lot of people that I want to do well, and, like, not everyone can. So, obviously, very Will Buxton thing to me to say. But that's okay. Will Buxton's cool. He's my boy, Willie B. So at times, yes, there are conflicting priorities when I'm watching a race. I have to wear, like, a Charles Leclerc shirt, and then a Lewis Hamilton jersey, and then an Alex Albon hat, and it's just, and, my whatever bracelet. Like, it's a lot. But the juju is real. I believe in witchcraft. Nico Rosberg is doing whatever he's doing, taking pictures in front of cars. So I gotta make sure my people are taken care of, because I have that power. But anyway, getting back to Yuki. Yuki has stepped up his social media presence. I mean, with YukiTube, his Beyond the Grid episode that just came out, he arranged a birthday shindig for the AlphaTauri admin Josh, which it did look like a children's birthday party, but it was adorable. He's been inconsistent in his car. He's improved so much. He's taking everything so seriously. And I really enjoy his straightforwardness and his willingness to answer questions that other drivers might just talk around, regardless of what it is. He's just genuine without being over the top and trying really hard. He likes what he likes, even if he gets made fun of for it. Like, in an age where drivers are really just trying to be as palatable as possible to sponsors, social media, large swaths of fans, he's fresh and he just is himself, which I think is really commendable, especially... Okay. Everyone was complaining about this long break, and obviously we were supposed to have the Chinese Grand Prix, and the break would have been like 2 weeks instead, but now we're about to go into 6 weeks of 5 races, so a double header, break, triple header. And I do wonder if we'll find in the coming years if there is a cap to the amount of races that we can feasibly have. I think we're already finding it, not just like fan fatigue as a viewer, but in terms of logistics and drivers and their burnout, right? I mean, how much traveling is like statistically good for you? I don't know, like the different time zones and just the general, like, they have lives outside of this, they have families and whatever. I know it's their job and they've decided to do this, but there is a limit to like what you can do to your employee, like out of good faith, right? Duty of care to the people you're supposed to be employing. At least that's the general idea. But also, as you add races to the calendar, you kind of dilute the importance of each race, at least from a points perspective, because each race means less in terms of the championship and the title battle. And so if you DNF a couple of races, there'll be enough points to get back to it if you're like, I don't know, a Max Verstappen or whatever the dominant car is at the time. And I love Formula One. I love watching races. And I don't necessarily get tired of it. I really don't. But I do think that if there were less Formula One races, I'd be more inclined to get into other series that I've kind of been neglecting. Like, I've started very, very casually watching IndyCar and Formula E, which I enjoy and want to remain a casual fan of. I don't want to know everything about everyone and all the teams, and I don't want to know the lore. I just want to enjoy the racing, which I think is good, because if I know too much, then I'd get in too deep. So that's a personal problem. Like, that, you could know everything and not care. And just like that, it's Thursday, and media day for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix is already over, and it's been a fun time because K-Mag was shading Gunther Steiner about having a lot of time to voice record for his own audiobook, and Charles was getting called a musical sensation left and right and asking and being asked if he's used inspiration of Einaudi in his piano piece, which is hilarious. Also, the admission of Pierre Gasly saying that there's a losers club flight at the back of the plane coming back from Melbourne with him, Esteban, Charles, and George, where they had a few drinks and cried. It's just... I'm glad that's the quote we're using. We can get over him calling himself tripod now, which is good, because I never want to hear anything like that ever again. Anyway, this is going to be quite the weekend, as the sprint shootout for me starts at 3:30 a.m., so I can only imagine what it's like for people in other places and time zones. So here we go. Time for engineered insanity, crazy, unpredictable races in Baku. Thank you so much for listening, and you can find me on TikTok at Formula_Dev, same on Twitter, and please feel free to share any feedback for the pod or any questions or critiques or whatever you want to tell me. Thanks so much for listening, guys. See you next week.